Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Tuesday, September the 7th, 2021. The media, don't you just hate them? I know I do. This is from Jesse Singal's Substack. Some mainstream outlets can't even perform basic news gathering functions anymore. How Andy Ngo's coverage of the Wee Spa controversy humiliated Slate, The Guardian, and other outlets. He begins, this is a post about the aftermath of the Wee Spa incident. I already wrote a long article about the basics of the case and don't want to repeat those points. Rather, I want to focus on what just happened. A bunch of major media outlets got totally, embarrassingly bodied by Andy Ngo. Ngo is, well, it's complicated. He's a journalist whose views I disagree with, Singal writes, particularly when it comes to his focus on Antifa as an extremely dangerous force in American life. I also disagree with his penchant for posting the mugshots of arrested radicals who haven't yet been convicted of anything. Ngo also sometimes gets the goods. It's undeniable. This is particularly the case when it comes to areas where liberal journalists fear to tread, or really to do their jobs. So, as I noted in my last article, Slate, The Guardian, and other outlets published articles about the Wee Spa incident, focusing mainly on the theory that the whole thing was likely some sort of right-wing hoax. Believing it was a hoax required ignoring a fair amount of evidence that something had happened and exaggerating the strength of the evidence favoring the hoax theory. So that's what these outlets did. For example, they credulously amplified a claim from the Los Angeles Blade that services at the spa were appointment only and that no transgender clients had appointments that day. Let's set aside that it's fairly unusual for a mainstream outlet to cite a double anonymous claim. The Los Angeles Blade reporter was writing under a pseudonym and quoting an anonymous source within Wee Spa. 5 minutes of research would have revealed that this didn't really tell us anything, because in addition to Wee Spa's appointment-only services, anyone can gain entrance to most of the facilities for a $30 day pass. 5 minutes might be a stretch. It's right here, and there is a link to a web page. The outlets who went with the likely hoax angle also ignored the presence of an eyewitness, who said publicly that as far as he could tell, it wasn't a hoax, and who posted an alternate angle video proving he was present in the immediate aftermath of the alleged event. This is from Bennett Kelly, who was replying to Patricia Arquette, the actress. Not a hoax. I was there that night. I'm one of the people in line. In the viral video, a bunch of women stormed out of the ladies' lockers, including a mother with her young child, complaining about a naked transgender person. Singal writes, I emailed Bennett Kelly at the end of July and didn't hear back. I emailed him again last night just to check if any other outlets had reached out to him to gain more information about what he saw. None did, and neither of the aforementioned outlets even mentioned his tweets, which weren't hard to find. I haven't looked as closely into the LA Times' coverage, but it appears to be similar, and his name didn't come up there either. Singal had tweeted, Bennett Kelly tweeted publicly, the Wee Spa incident didn't appear to be a hoax since he was an eyewitness to the immediate aftermath. He says no journalist other than me reached out to him to ask what he saw. So, guy writing publicly under his own name who says it wasn't a hoax, he doesn't make it into the stories. Double anonymous claim that seems to clash with the Wee Spa's stated policies. Let's run with it. I hope you're sitting down. It wasn't a hoax. And it was Andy Ngo who again got the goods. Ngo had tweeted, in June, a woman alleged a person exposed their penis to women and girls at Wee Spa. Liberal press declared it a transphobic hoax. Story was supposed to go away, but I investigated and found charges were discreetly filed. The subject is a registered sex offender. Darren A.G. Merriger, who spoke exclusively to the New York Post, denies the allegations and says that she is actually the victim of transphobic harassment. From the Post, again, sources with knowledge of the case but not authorized to speak publicly say 4 women and a minor girl came forward to allege that Darren A.G. Merriger was partially erect in the women's section of We Spa. Besides being a suspect in the case, Marriger is facing multiple felony charges of indecent exposure over a separate incident in Los Angeles. The LAPD so far have confirmed a few details about the We Spa incident. Inquiries sent to the department were responded with statements saying the investigation is ongoing. I'll just break in here to say that you see this bias on behalf of the media that transgender people, trans people, are the bestest people in the whole world. They're not weirdos. No, not at all. And they would never do anything weird or sick, especially involving minors. No, 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 no. Anyone who alleges that such a thing happened is obviously a bad person who needs to be shunned and preferably deplatformed. But back to Single. Marriger denies the charges and nothing has been proven in court yet, but of course her status as a former sex offender should nudge us to believe that yes, something improper happened. The Guardian appeared to have two reporters, Lois Beckett and Sam Levin, assigned to this story, and a third, Julia Carey Wong, helping out with at least one of the articles as a researcher. The situation had also attracted the attention of the aforementioned outlets, plus the Daily Beast, mostly doing aggregation, to be fair, The Independent, and others. How was No able to beat all of them to the story? Simple. He was in a position where he was free to go wherever the facts led and report on what he found. Most of the other reporters weren't, or so I would argue. As I mentioned in my last piece, it's noteworthy that Levin is one of the co-authors on an article by a trio of Guardian US employees, harshly criticizing the British counterparts for an unsigned editorial that dared to suggest there could be some trade-offs to self-ID in that country, and which referred to that editorial as transphobic. Of course, a reporter who believes that even discussing this possibility is tantamount to transphobia is not going to be able to cover a fast-moving, ambiguous story centered on those issues fairly, and sure enough, he doesn't. Single writes further, sure enough, Levin failed to do his job here. Now he has to play catch-up. In most cases, the process was likely more subtle than that, but I promise you that anyone working on this story at a mainstream outlet understood that if they came to the wrong conclusion, it would cause them a lot of drama, at best some visceral unpleasantness, and accusations of transphobia on Twitter. So they decided not to do their jobs. They didn't do the normal stuff you would try to do to find out if an alleged illegal act had been committed by, say, a conservative. And this isn't top-flight journalism or anything. I mean, good for No for getting the story, but finding out someone has been charged with a crime is not a particularly noteworthy achievement for anyone who has experience reporting on criminal justice. Now, though, Andy No gets to present himself as the one journalist willing to handle the story professionally, and rightfully so. And all the other outlets involved should be feeling pretty humiliated. What do you think this sort of thing does to trust in mainstream outlets in the long run? The outlets are handling their failures in different ways. The most tabloidish of the bunch, the LA Blade, doesn't appear to have altered its initial article at all. Slate has stuck an editor's note to the top of its piece that basically negates the whole thing and stealth-edited the headline from "Violence over a transphobic hoax shows the danger of underestimating anti-trans hate" to "Violence over an alleged transphobic hoax shows the danger of underestimating anti-trans hate." The Guardian has published a follow-up story acknowledging the arrest warrant, but spending a lot of time both speculating that things might not quite be what they seem and noting all the bad people who have glommed onto this story. In addition to revealing the basic news-gathering failures that are crippling journalism, not all of which are ideological, I would add, there's of course been a structural collapse too, and there are simply fewer traditional reporters doing reporting. This case nicely captures, I would argue, why so many people are fleeing to alternative sources. Imagine 3 years ago someone said to you, there's a complicated, controversial, fast-moving controversy unfolding. The Daily Beast, the LA Times, Slate, The Guardian, other outlets are on it, as is Andy No, an independent journalist with little real institutional backing. Who's going to get the story? You can place bets on No or on the field, that is, anyone but No. Who do you choose? laughably easy bet, right? Not anymore. Not now that mainstream outlets have decided to forego basic news gathering activities. And make no mistake, it is a decision, Jesse Singal concludes. I think part of the problem is the dearth of editors. If someone had handed in this story to me, back when I was an editor, I would have said, well, you called the police, right? No. Well, call the police. What is wrong with you? Did you search the internet, Twitter, for any contemporary evidence of this? No. Why not? You spend all day on the internet and you never thought to do this? But most important is, again, what Singal says, that these news outlets don't care about what is true or not, or what can be verified or not. As an official of the George W. Bush administration said, and I suppose I'm paraphrasing here, we create our own reality. The Daily Beast, the LA Times, Slate, The Guardian, The Independent, and others, they create their own realities. Here's James Kirkpatrick on VDare. Trust and verify when it comes to mainstream media reporting. It was one of those stories that was too good to check from a publication that has made literal fake news its stock in trade. Rolling Stone, best known for its A Rape on Campus hoax, decided to put out another story with questionable sources. I remember very well the A Rape on Campus hoax, or as Steve Saylor called it, the Kristallnacht hoax, that we're supposed to believe that numerous men in a frat house raped a woman on a floor that was covered with broken glass from a smashed coffee table. No one would believe that story, but Rolling Stone did, and it became a national story. A lot of money was paid out as a result of this. Back to Kirkpatrick, the original title was Gunshot Victims Left Waiting as Horse Dewormer Overdoses Overwhelm Oklahoma Hospitals, Doctors Says. For whatever reason, Rolling Stone and other mainstream media outlets are absolutely obsessed with the eye drug, which is a drug used in humans and animals to treat parasites. Some say that it is helpful with COVID-19. The FDA says it should not be used for treating the disease. Obviously, this is an issue of credibility and trust. You can't have that when news outlets may simply be making things up. That's what happened here. At Numbers Muncher or Josh Jordan tweeted, Rolling Stone ran a story that they could have debunked with a single phone call. They didn't make that phone call because they wanted it to be true and because it went viral and got clicks, and they'll keep doing it because no one will hold them accountable. Rolling Stone has since updated the story. It has not pulled it. Now it has a new title. In other words, the story was false. The Washington Examiner commented the biggest names in progressive media loved the story and shared it widely on Twitter. Rachel Maddow tweeted a version of the story to her 10.5 million followers, and the Daily Beast's Wajahat Ali retweeted the story, adding, quote, "It's like a biblical horror story. You literally have people denying a vaccine and life to follow their pharaohs towards death," unquote. The problem is the story was complete fiction. And of course, Joy Reid bought into it along with the New York Daily News, Newsweek, The Guardian, and Insider. I am just, I have a reflexive attitude to the regime media, which is I disbelieve everything they print in the absence of strong evidence to the contrary. Or as that old cynical communist Claude Coburn once said with regard to official sources, believe nothing until it has been officially denied. So Kirkpatrick concludes, most Americans just read the headlines from news stories. Any updates or corrections fade into the background. Outright hoaxes still serve a political purpose. In the eye drug case, most will forget that the stories were fake and retain a vague memory that dumb Americans were overdosing from horse medicine when not shooting each other. We're constantly told about a threat to democracy because people don't trust the press. Yet, if anything, people aren't cynical enough. At this point, one must regard reports from the MSN as sensationalized, misleading, or outright false until more information is revealed. There have simply been too many cases where journalists have shown themselves to be either fools or rogues. During a pandemic, when getting accurate information is a matter of life and death, this is a crime beyond forgiveness. Of course, with immigration, it may be even worse. To truly understand the immigration issue, you need to know about the ways that the courts work, the perverse incentives created by bad legislation, the failures of the bureaucracy, and how immigration law enforcement officers are prevented from doing their job. You won't get such reporting from the MSN. You'll just get it from vdare.com. And of course, the MSN's response to this is simply to demand more censorship. I have one more fake news story, and it's about a man that I did not know of until today. He's called, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing this because these names are increasingly impossible to pronounce, Samir Bizel Woods, known professionally as Lil Uzi Vert, is an American rapper and singer-songwriter. Woods is characterized by his facial tattoos, facial piercings, eccentric hairstyles, and androgynous fashion. Imagery built on a melodic emo approach to trap. Born and raised in Philadelphia, born 1994, Lil Uzi Vert gained initial recognition following the release of the commercial mixtape Love Is Rage, which led to a recording contract with Atlantic Records, to whom he signed to under DJ Drama's Generation Now imprint. So what do we know about this fellow? According to Wikipedia, he's been accused of being a Satanist, originally by battle rapper Daylight, who claimed that Woods worshipped Satan. Woods has been said to be inspired by Marilyn Manson's worship and support of Satan, who he called his biggest inspiration. In July 2018, Woods told a crowd of fans that they were going to hell with him. In August 2017, Woods created controversy by adding satanic imagery to his social media accounts and saying phrases often associated with Satanism, such as 666. Woods frequently promotes Satanism on his social media, which went far enough to warrant his Instagram access being taken from him by his record label. And okay, before we get to the diamond, again, this is from Wikipedia. On July the 23rd of this year, Woods confirmed that he bought a planet, WASP-127b, according to Grimes, wife of Elon Musk, who is always a sober and reliable source. Experts in the field have stated that it is a dubious claim. Not as dubious as this. This is from the New York Post. Lil Uzi Vert's $24 million diamond ripped out of his head at Rolling Loud. What was that again? The mystery of Lil Uzi Vert's $24 million forehead diamond has been solved, possibly. The 26-year-old rapper revealed his pricey bling was ripped out of his forehead when he dove into a crowd at Rolling Loud in July. I had a show at Rolling Loud, and I jumped into the crowd, and they kind of ripped it out, he told TMZ at the 18th anniversary of Jay-Z's 40/40 Club last month. I'm feeling good, he said. I still have the diamond, so I feel good. However, fans have been speculating since June that he had the gem removed as he was spotted without it at the time. Lil Uzi, whose real name is Samir Bizel Woods, first started tweeting about the diamond in January, revealing he'd spent years saving up so he could buy it from his favorite jewelry designer, Eliante. Okay, first off, this man does not have $24 million with which to buy a diamond. Keep in mind, this would be $24 million after tax, and few people have heard of this man. What did he keep a big jar, with quarters in it? And he just scrimped and saved over years, and one day he finally had the $24 million he'd been aiming for. Rappers are notoriously skint, that they claim to have bought fabulous homes or Lamborghinis, and it turns out that they're renting the home or they're leasing the car, or some Kardashian bought it from them. They don't have that much. Jay-Z has a lot of money, apparently, but most of them do not. It's been rumored for years and years and years that Kanye West is so deeply in debt to Jay-Z that he will never get out from under it. But let's talk about this diamond. Okay. How does one get a diamond attached to one's forehead? With glue, say? I suppose you could do that, but that might be difficult. What if you're in the shower or having a bath or in a swimming pool? Was there a little cage there, built into his forehead to keep the diamond from popping out? And what are the likely health consequences of such an arrangement? This is obviously a completely bogus story, but the New York Post and other outlets reported on it as if it were true. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Red Sulphur, Anrun, Dan, Head McNack, William Hicks, Doranal, that's a new name to me. Chogokin666 says, we're living in a giant never-ending hoax. Buddy says, Kevin, do consider streaming live on Sundays, as that's when my son plays his ball games now. The gallery misses me blasting the show and is starving for fresh KMG content. Well, that may well be true. However, I don't like to work on Sundays because it is the Lord's Day. Ed McNeck says, Kevin, if you're sick of the hotel, I emailed you about an alternative. Well, I'll definitely look into it. Buddy says, Kevin, thank you for admitting the obvious but controversial truth that Monica Lewinsky is actually quite attractive. Pete Ferguson says, KMG, I started reading Larry Kramer's. I need to get on Truvada. How did this get published? Well, I'll tell you. I guess, in the 80s, I used to spend a lot of time in bookstores, and I used to buy a lot of remaindered books because you'd get hardcover books, in mint condition for a couple of bucks. Sometimes you get books that were published at $40, $50. You buy them for $4 or $5. So I knew who Larry Kramer was. And so he published this novel, which begins with an F and ends with an S, and there are, T's in there, and an A and G, and published by Random House. So I thought, this looks interesting. So I read it, and I thought that I'd had a cast iron stomach, but I was truly revolted, sickened by this. It's about gay life in New York City just before AIDS hit. And I just reading this, I came to the conclusion that these people are insane. Not only insane, but dangerous. Of course, Larry Kramer is considered to be a great American hero. Hello to Visionary Companion, the Seattle POC? I don't know what that is. Grocery has unisex bathrooms, which caused an embarrassing incident due to my lack of pause wokeness. Respectable commenting name says, the thing is that Andy No has been one of the few journalists handling these stories like a professional for years. He has not managed to shame his colleagues thus far, simply to make himself a target. Well, it's even worse than in this story, because I often read stories where I think, do you even know how to use Wikipedia or Google? Because there's a whole bunch of really basic facts wrong in this story, which are easily ascertained. People complain about Wikipedia, but there are footnotes there, and one can typically go to the original source material. William Hicks says, Kevin, don't they have some kind of journalistic bar association where they can issue a reprimand or strip a reporter of his credentials? No such thing. People can complain Newspapers and television stations, radio stations typically belong to voluntary organizations which can adjudicate disputes. Visionary Companion says, I was mistaken for a pervert for no other reason that I assumed that if there was a urinal, I was free to pee. Next thing I knew, a female employee was interrogating me. Hello to 1467 Masterson Wilson and Don Willis. How is Rolling Stone still in business? Well, barely. I believe I mentioned yesterday that Jan Wenner, over the years and into this century, or even perhaps a decade ago, was offered quite large sums for his magazine. And he said, no, it's just assuming that the value was going to go up and up and up, and then it just crashed, like all magazines. How many magazines make money? If you look at opinion magazines, all of them, some rich person or some foundation is paying for them. And this was one of my predictions that came true. Circa 2000, I predicted that a decade later, all magazines which are not based on photography will fail. Magazines based on photography include Vogue and Vanity Fair and Architectural Digest, that sort of thing, where you can put pictures on the internet, but you're not going to get the same effect as looking at these gorgeous pictures printed on heavy, glossy stock. Hello to Palpicasso 88. And so reputation doesn't matter at all. Well, no, they respect each other, you see, and that's all that counts. Metal Mike says, are you going to bother watching the leaders debate? I think I'll just watch the highlights because I can hardly bear it. Seriously, I can hardly bear it. Do you think reputation ever mattered? What does Iago say in Othello? Yes, I know what he says in Othello. That's from Dionysus. And, you know, he who steals my purse steals trash. But he who steals my reputation. Oberon made the obvious, devastating comment about that Iago is the greatest villain in English literature. Jokerkin666 says, one of those SoundCloud mutants scadged on my bus yesterday. Idiot was wearing Crocs with hearts and pink sweats. He feels good, but does he feel better than James Brown, says William Hicks. Had the gem removed. Come on, man. When does Lil Uzi and Lil Betts album drop? Yeah, didn't they all used to be MC something or other. Now it's all Lil something or other. Don Willis says, was in my younger associate's office today. He Googled something and was reading and scrolling. I whipped out my phone, found answer on the spot. True Greenberg says, KMG, what's your opinion of William S. Burroughs? I once owned a number of William S. Burroughs novels and found them impossible to read. Impossible. Perhaps because I wasn't stoned on something or other. Back in the 80s, I think it was, Penguin published two of his memoirs. One was called Queer and one was called Junkie, and they were written in English, and I thought that they were rather good. Marie Osmond is very well preserved as well. Even Kevin concurs. Yeah, she was pimping two different things on my old man's TV station, and she looks, I know the tricks that they use, but it's harder, you know, in high def than it used to be. Okay. But Marie Osmond was also attractive when she was young. That's the point. People don't get better looking as they grow older. So if you start out being, you know, this good looking, you know, maybe by that time you're 50 or 55, you can still be this good looking. You know, if you don't ruin your health. Do you like John Fowles? Is it Fowles or Fools? Says Oscar Toe. No, not particularly. All right. And are we going to still talk about falseness here? Yeah, this is rather more serious. than Lil Vert or Lil Uzi Vert. This is from Lisa Sellen Davis's Substack, September the 3rd. What the left media won't report about gender-affirming medicine, none of this should be politicized. Bit late in the day to make that complaint. You know, I steadfastly refuse to watch TV dramas that concern themselves with the ethical dilemmas of lawyers, or the ethical dilemmas of policemen, or the ethical dilemmas of medical personnel, because they don't have any ethical dilemmas. One day it's decided that we all believe this now, and nobody stands out against it. If they feel that strongly, they leave. And the trans industry is a prime example of this. It was considered to be a mental disorder for the longest time, and then, oh no, it's wonderful. Oh no, and let's start doing it with 20-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 10-year-olds, because gender affirming, got to be gender affirming. Anyway, Lisa Sellen Davis begins earlier this summer in an attempt to educate the public, I guess. The New York Times ran an article about puberty blockers. I noted that Republicans are targeting these drugs, but such framing contributes to the politicization of treatment for gender dysphoria, rather than taking the reader beyond that idea. Supporting or cautioning against the use of these drugs has nothing to do with politics, even it's been playing out that way in this country. Some Republicans and conservatives have trans or gender dysphoric kids, and we should stop assuming that's the same thing, but that's for another post. And embrace blockers and what comes often after them, cross-sex hormones and sometimes surgeries. Some Democrats and liberals reject blockers or worry about them and what can come after them. The practice of pausing puberty and the host of other changes in bodies and brain development that come with puberty should not be politicized. It should be based on evidence. And the media has a responsibility to properly report on that evidence. Well, the evidence that they're interested in is this much disputed figure of 41% of transsexuals who commit suicide or try to commit suicide. Why you would want to make more transsexuals when their suicide rate or attempted suicide rate is so high is an interesting question. But, I learned from Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, which I cannot recommend more highly, that the way that it works now is some teenaged girl, or maybe even preteen girl, says to her parents, "You will let me do this or I will kill myself." That is not the basis for good medicine as I understand it. Anyway, back to the article. The article noted that Arkansas conservatives have argued that the risks of gender transition procedures far outweigh any benefit at this stage of clinical study on these procedures, and that medical experts say that's not the case. But which medical experts? The author quotes some leaders in gender-affirming care, but fails to talk to critics of it from within the medical and mental health fields, or to mention two very basic facts. The first is that several other countries or major medical centers in those countries are also banning or limiting the use of blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries in children. The youngest child I've heard of getting a double mastectomy or top surgery, along with testosterone injections, was 12. By 13, my source told me she regretted it, although, of course, I have talked to and read about plenty of young people who are very happy they transitioned. Finland has severely restricted the practice. In at least one pediatric gender clinic in Western Australia, a patient now needs a court order to medically transition. Sweden's Karolinska Hospital and several other Swedish hospitals that provided pediatric medical gender transition have stopped providing gender-affirming treatment for kids under 18, except in clinical trials. In other words, if kids are medically transitioning in those places, doctors, therapists, and researchers are watching carefully to make sure the protocol is working as intended, alleviating dysphoria with bodily changes. Per this article on Medscape, the outlet that I think is the best source if you want honest, nuanced discussion of and debate around the topic, this decision comes amid growing unease in some quarters regarding the speed at which hormonal treatment of children with gender dysphoria has become accepted as the norm in many countries, despite what critics say is a lack of evidence of any benefit, plus known harms of treatment. Well, why don't we call it what this is? The sexual mutilation of children. The affirmation medical model, we're clearly working for some people, sometimes backfires. Earlier this year, the UK's National Institute for Health and Care Excellence reviewed the evidence after a young woman named Kira Bell sued the NIH for facilitating the transition she came to regret. What did NICE find? Sometimes puberty blockers and other treatments were helpful, alleviating some depression while not affecting anger or anxiety levels. Sometimes they improved global or psychological functioning. This is no surprise. For the kids I've talked to who are severely dysphoric at puberty, the idea of pausing was so appealing, such a relief. It put off the thing they dreaded. I will just mention, if you read Schreier's book, Abigail Schreier's book, that you find out that she did extensive interviews with both boys and girls going through this. And with the girls, there were disturbing similarities. They all seemed to be driven, high achievers, both academically and in sports. Whether they were self-driven or driven by their parents is an interesting question. Almost all of them were on antidepressants or some other kind of mind-altering drugs, and almost all of them were or had been in some form of therapy. Are we perhaps getting a picture here? Rebel News is in the news. I don't want to talk about Ezra Levant. If you know me, I have had some difficulties with him. But nonetheless, they're banning his news organization from debates, and I don't think that they should. And it's obviously because they don't like his politics. A federal court judge will rule Wednesday on a right-wing media organization's request for an injunction after it was denied accreditation to cover this week's two official federal leaders' debates. Let's see if there is anything on Twitter here. Just hang on a second. What is the latest? Okay. I'm not seeing anything in a way of a decision. Okay. But I'm sure we'll find out about it soon enough. So the argument that was made against Levant and his organization is that he is an activist. The Election Commission responded in court documents that Rebel violated the Commission's conflict of interest rules because it was actively involved in campaigns related to the stories it covers. In a letter filed in court, Debates Commissioner and former Governor General David Johnston cites Rebel's fundraising campaigns to raise money to oppose policies, including COVID-19 vaccine passports, a federal bill to amend the Broadcasting Act, the federal government's quarantine hotel requirements, and to constitutionally challenge Saskatchewan's lockdown law. Well, not that long ago, Canada's news media accepted $595 million from the Trudeau government, and yet that somehow doesn't disqualify them. Oh, and let's talk about the dog that didn't bark. This is from the Wall Street Journal. BP Rising tweets the golden age of fraud. When are U.S. leaders going to check this BS? Dallas Fed leader Robert Kaplan made multiple million-dollar-plus stock trades in 2020. And it's not like the chair of the Dallas Fed would have any kind of inside information about the economy or, monetary policy, this sort of thing. No, everything above board. A friend of mine sent me some thoughts on this. You read about Nancy Pelosi trading not just stocks, but call options, etc., and you think, how can this be allowed? Then I smack myself and say, you're not in Kansas anymore. It says, Jim Chano said the golden age of fraud, but this isn't fraud, it's legal, it's systematic rot. U.S. leaders, Congress themselves can trade individual stocks of companies they regulate and award government contracts with, so asking U.S. leaders to do something is pointless. And yes, interesting talk about, the Fed rushing in to defend China from its, shall we say, financial enthusiasm. Evergrande is the Chinese obscenely leveraged real estate entity that is the worry. Its bonds now yield 50% on the 2026s and are no longer accepted as collateral. So the rumor is that George Soros intends to, make another fortune by shorting China, but that the United States government is going to employ BlackRock to stop that from happening. And, okay. From fraud to something worse. This is an actual piece that was published in Salon by someone called Brett Bachman. Why Satanists may be the last best hope to save abortion rights in Texas. Was there an original headline written for this? And someone said, I'm sorry, that's not clickbaity enough. How about this? Why Satanists may be the last best hope to save abortion rights in Texas. And there is a picture here. Yes, the Baphomet statue is seen in the conversion room at the Satanic Temple in Salem, Massachusetts. Yes, there's no such thing as witches, devil worshippers. That's all a conspiracy theory. As pro-choice and reproductive health groups, or abortionists, as they're otherwise known, are scrambling to make sense of Texas's new near-total abortion ban that went into effect this week, it appears their efforts to skirt the law are getting an unexpected boost from one organization in particular, the Satanic Temple. The non-theistic organization, which is headquartered in Salem, Massachusetts, joined the legal fray this week by sending a letter to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration demanding access to abortion pills for its members. Well, if their witchcraft is so powerful, shouldn't they just be able to self-abort through the power of evil? I was working on a cover story about Marilyn Manson some years ago. Scared today, gone tomorrow. I thought that was a pretty good joke of mine. I found out that there is a great divide in the American Satanist movement. That the most famous person in that movement was at the time Anton LaVey. And Marilyn Manson was a devotee of Anton LaVey. Anton LaVey was a non-theistic Satanist. So what, it's about the power of positive thinking then? Or the power of unpositive thinking, the power of evil thinking, or selfish thinking? I found out that most of what Anton LaVey had come up with as the rules for his church were cribbed from Ayn Rand. Yes, really. And I forget the name of this fellow. He was a captain or a major in the U.S. Air Force. And he had a huge battle with Anton LaVey because he was a theistic Satanist. And again, I really don't understand the point of atheistic Satanism, but I don't have that much of a interest in it. This is a story from Maddie Bender at Vice. Gen Z is developing unexplained tics after going online, and doctors are concerned. Internationally, pandemic-related stressors and social media are converging in an epidemic within a pandemic of Tourette's-like tics in young people. Alex Turnquist began noticing her tics at the end of her spring semester at Loyola University Chicago. The COVID-19 pandemic forced the then 20-year-old out of her dorm and back home with her parents. It was there, watching videos of herself recorded in Snapchat, that she saw her eyelid twitching uncontrollably in playbacks. Soon after, her head started shaking in a distinctive, jerky way. Maybe this is just like St. Vitus's dance from the Middle Ages. She told her psychiatrist, who wondered if antidepressants had brought on the tics. Yes, can't have enough young people, very young people, teenagers, on antidepressants. After a year of follow-up, which included briefly going off the medication to no avail, Turnquist was diagnosed with an abnormal tic disorder. She's still not sure what caused it to appear when it did, but this March she posted to TikTok under the handle alexandria.joy after seeing recent reports from the UK that seem to describe what she was experiencing. Well, we've decided to rewire children's brains, or to let them rewire themselves, such that it is now commonly reported that young people cannot, and sometimes even millennials, cannot concentrate on anything. They can't even watch a TV show or a movie for more than 15 minutes at a time. That's how short their attention span is. Also from Vax, anti-vaxxers are learning how to game TikTok's algorithm, and they're going viral. Ay, ay, ay. That's the worst thing ever. Worst thing ever. Oh, and more Vice news from Shayla Love. People aren't addicted to wearing masks. They're traumatized. Okay, if you say so, Vice. If you say so. We have some good news from the Wall Street Journal from Douglas Belkin. Men are abandoning higher education in such numbers that they now trail female college students by record levels. At the close of the 2020 to 2021 academic year, women made up 59.5% of college students, an all-time high, and men 40.5%. According to enrollment data from the National Student Clearinghouse, a nonprofit research group, U.S. colleges and universities had 1.5 million fewer students compared with 5 years ago. Yes. And men accounted for 71% of the decline. I wonder how soon it is before a whole bunch of private colleges start failing. I mean, shutting down. The education gap, which holds at both 2- and 4-year colleges, has been slowly widening for 40 years. The divergence increases at graduation. After 6 years of college, 65% of women in the U.S. who started a 4-year university course in 2012 received diplomas by 2018, compared with 59% of men during the same period. In the next few years, 2 women will earn a college degree for every man if the trend continues, says Douglas Shapiro, executive director of the Research Center at the National Student Clearinghouse. No reversal is in sight. Men are falling behind remarkably fast, said Thomas Mortensen, a senior scholar at the Pell Institute for the Study of Opportunity in Higher Education, which aims to improve educational opportunities for low-income, first-generation, and disabled college students. American colleges, which are embroiled in debates over racial and gender equality. Oh, I see. You mean screaming at white men that they're the worst people on earth, that they're irredeemably evil? That might be one thing driving men out of colleges and universities, but it has been observed. I suppose this may have been first observed in the Soviet Union, that medicine was quite female. And as a result, it became low status. And high-flying men decided they did not want to be in a low-status profession. And you see that again and again and again. What good are these degrees, by the way, especially when one considers how much they cost? I mean, these people should be trained, in manual labor, which is useful. Obviously, arts education has a utility, but it is not a universal utility. And as Donald Glover joked on Community, that the reason that he didn't want to learn how to be a plumber or do air conditioning repair is that he wanted to understand what HBO shows were about. Well, that has a very limited utility for sure. Let's go back to the chat. Dionysus says, I have mild verbal and typing tics, especially when I drink. I have to be careful when I'm drunk on social media. It should be illegal for me to use social media when I have been drinking. Yes, many of us can say the same. Oscar Toe says that they should just use the college funding to pay off the loan disaster and close the universities. Well, if you look up Harvard, Yale, Princeton, whatever, and you look at how much money they have, is this a university or is it a hedge fund? William Hicks says, and yet men will perform 95% of the most dangerous jobs and still be making more money per annum. Don Willis says, these cream puffs get traumatized just going out in public. William Hicks says, electricians, plumbers, heating, air, other trades, very lucrative. And, in those trades, typically you get a sense of actually being valuable to society and to other individuals, to other people. Instead of being, a cubicle drone or, being on your third unpaid internship. What else do we have here? We live in demonic times. Who needs to make it official? Says Red Sulfur. Texas Feral Hog says civilized behavior is probably based on what would once have been emotional disorders. Oh, I don't know about that. Look at the Japanese, for example. I was told for decades that the reason that Japanese culture is so formalized is because the Japanese are so cold. It turns out it's exactly the opposite. The reason that Japanese culture is so polite and formalized is because the Japanese are so hot and they need to restrain themselves. Those pieces of paper straight to right from KMG's shoulder under chair have been bothering me for days. Really? Oh, okay. I think I see them now. All right. I'll take them away, although not right now. Fridge needs cleaning. Whose fridge? You can barely see my fridge. You can't see inside it. Oh, yeah, I don't want to talk about Ezra Levant. Don't want to talk about Ezra Levant. Who are we talking about? Kelly McGillis? It was incredibly overrated when younger, says Ann Run. I didn't find her all that attractive at all. Yeah, she was decent looking. She wasn't gorgeous. Not close. Not close. Now she's a lesbian now, right? Is that how it works? Well, we have Ellen Barkin saying how long until cis white males get canceled. Respectable commenting name says, I don't think they needed a conspiracy to remove it from the DMs like homosexuality did. NPR bragged about said conspiracy 20 years ago in 81 words. I think it's just another farmer revenue. Well, there's a lot of money involved in one, drugs, treatments, and the best kind of surgery, unnecessary surgery. I've known women who've gotten a bit better looking as they age. That isn't impossible. Well, actually, it is. I mean, women. If a woman was overweight and she lost a significant amount of that, so she wasn't overweight, then she's going to be better looking. But that's that doesn't deal with the fundamentals. If a woman has a terrible hairstyle and she gets a better hairstyle, say, or she's a bad dresser and starts dressing better. Again, these don't really deal with the fundamentals. Okay. And what are we going to talk about now? Yeah, let's talk about the Bolsonaro blues, because there's a new horror on the left, or I suppose it's the new horror is on the right, and there's no escaping it. It's coming. It can't be stopped. A couple of years ago, there was a book by a clever young man called Eric Kaufman, which I reviewed on the old book club. It's called White Shift: Populism, Immigration, and the Future of White Majorities. Essentially, the argument is that white people are going to disappear, and we're all just going to have to get used to it. Maybe we'll be spared somehow. Let's see. Wikipedia says the Times made White Shift the book of the week, but with a skeptical review by David Aronovich, who's worthless, who called it a big controversial book about a big controversial subject. Publishers Weekly said it was likely to make a big splash. The New Yorker wrote that Kaufman and White Shift were defending white identity politics. Oh dear. That's not actually what Eric Kaufman was defending. But a lot of people were really taken aback when Jair Bolsonaro was elected president of Brazil, because Brazil is just so multiculti and diverse. And this is some like old school white guy who seems to represent old school white guy values. So how did he manage to be elected president of Brazil? Well, I guess because, tough guy. He seems like a tough guy, talking tough, rather like Donald Trump. You see that with Trump and Bolsonaro and with, say, Nigel Farage, you see a reversal of the feminization of politics. You know what I think pretty much greased the skids for Donald Trump's ascendancy in politics? Donald Draper on Mad Men. Here's a piece by Graham Dockery. Hang on just a second. Dockery on RT. In a stunning victory for diversity, parody-proof CNN reveals America's next generation of white supremacists aren't even white. When news organizations look you in the eye and tell you that the white supremacists of the future aren't actually white, they can mean only one thing: the racism industrial complex is up to its old tricks again. CNN writer John Blake put forth an astounding theory over the weekend that even in the future, where white people are no longer a majority in the United States, white supremacy will still infect the country, its toxic creed carried on by mixed-race Americans and Latino immigrants. The article begins with a prime example of what conservative scholar Michael Anton calls the celebration paradox. In this case, the shrinking of the U.S. white majority is celebrated, despite being written off as a conspiracy theory when others speak of it negatively. I want to believe my country is on the verge of the brown new world, Blake writes, pointing to examples of other commentators celebrating the countdown to the white apocalypse. But the celebration is short-lived. Instead, Blake argues that the beige mystery meat Americans of the near future will still be racist, as white supremacy finds new hosts among the country's exploding Latino population. Get the impression that this fellow, who is black, and I looked him up, and I looked up what he writes about, and this is John Jarvis who said it's black, black, blackety, black, black, all the time. Apart from being a vile piece of anti-white propaganda, the article is confused in its tone. Mixed marriages are presented as an antidote to racism before being described as a shield for white supremacy. Readers are instructed to ignore the biological fiction of race, but only after being told that you can no longer fight racism if everyone believes their country has moved past race. Yes, once again, go back to Michael Anton, race doesn't exist. Oh, okay. You know what's the worst thing in the world? What? Racism, white racism. Oh, by the way, white people don't exist, but white racism is the most horrible thing in the world. Blake finally states outright that the radical change America needs is the uprooting of systemic racism embedded in our public schools, neighborhoods, and justice system, and a more equitable sharing of power and resources. Yes, in other words, more jam for Mr. Blake. There we are. It's about money and power, and more specifically, robbing the white majority of its grasp on both. This Zimbabwe-style redistribution is already endorsed by activist groups like Black Lives Matter and the Movement for Black Lives, globalist organizers like the World Economic Forum, academics, and certain sectors of Congress and the federal government itself. What Blake has done, however, is to set out a plan for labeling anyone as a potential white supremacist an enemy in the never-ending battle for racial equity, regardless of their skin color. No examples of white supremacist policies or crimes are mentioned in the lengthy text. No white supremacist leaders are identified, and no real issue is raised with white people individually, save that they're white, and that this whiteness, which can be exhibited by non-whites too, is the problem. Well, yes. I suppose it depends on, which horse people identify with. And I get the impression I'm referring, of course, to Osama bin Laden's famous strong horse, weak horse distinction. That I'm sure you have all heard of passing which was when racial minorities pretended to be white in the bad old days and often got away with it. Well, let's look at someone like Megan Mertz. Megan Mertz is less than 50% white. There's 50% black, rather, but it's black, blackety black with her. And I was thinking of that. There was a writer named Charteris, Leslie Charteris, and he created The Saint. You know, the mystery series that was he was portrayed. The Saint was portrayed on TV by Roger Moore in the 1960s. Simon Templar, his name was. Well, his real surname was Yin. He was born in Singapore, and he was half Chinese. Well, Leslie Charteris went to great lengths to appear to be an Englishman, you know, an elegant Englishman, because that was the strong horse at the time. A latter-day Leslie Charteris would go the other way entirely. White, no, I'm not white. I hate the whiteness in me, etc., etc. I identify with my oppressed ancestors, the Chinese, and, oh, I'm sick of being called a model minority, blah, 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 right? But perhaps John Blake at CNN is worried about Negro fatigue, that especially amongst Latinos. I mean, it's well known in the United States that they don't get along. That Latinos or Hispanics have ethnically cleansed blacks from many neighborhoods, particularly in California. And we don't pay much attention to Latinos or Hispanics in the United States, but it seems that John Blake is paying attention. You know, perhaps if Blake is so concerned about being pushed out, maybe he could work to convince his people not to have so many abortions. But no, it's always the worst. It's always the worst. Someone like Blake, he's been given advantages solely because he is black. This has been going on for, about 60 years now in the United States. And what has been the result? Does it mean that black people feel closer to America than they did previously? Do they feel better personally? No. Overwhelmingly, they feel more estranged from America, and they feel more angry themselves. And so the solution to that, of course, is that we need more of the same, but it doesn't seem to be working. The modern concept of race has been used too long to enslave and exploit. As Audre Lorde, one of the most tiresome Americans of recent memory, the poet and activist, once said, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." I can't imagine why they couldn't be used, the master's tools, to dismantle the master's house. If there was a rebellion and the tools were seized, then the house could be dismantled with the tools. This woman doesn't seem to have much of imagination or even common sense. And, okay, what are we going to talk about now? We're going to talk about Joseph Tainter and the collapse of complex societies. And the question is, what Tainter is talking about in the nature of complex societies is how and why states formed, because states are quite late in human history. Psychological explanations of social phenomena are laced with pitfalls. If social patterns arise from the wishes or needs of individuals, where in turn do these wishes and needs come from? To the extent that the origin of these cannot be explained, the social phenomenon is also unexplained. To the extent that these are universal, social variation is unexplained. If ambition and self-aggrandizement are universal and lead to the state, why then did pristine states emerge no more than 6 times in human history? How did the human species survive roughly 99% of its history without the state? Why is the state such a recent oddity? Why were there no states in the Pleistocene? Conflict theorists point to the existence of a surplus as a necessary condition for the expression of this universal tendency. But a contradiction arises here. Marxists view material conditions as socially and culturally mediated. If so, then surpluses could supposedly be concocted whenever desired. The fact that they are not always concocted points to a lacuna in conflict theory. The emergence of surpluses, the supposed basis of stratification in the state, remains unexplained. Kantian makes the observation that the potential for production of a surplus exists even among hunters and gatherers, but is usually not realized. This is an important point. If ambition and self-aggrandizement are universal human characteristics, then why don't foragers ordinarily produce surpluses, wealth differentials, class conflict, and the state? Could it be that either ambition or its expression is not universal? If ambition is not universal, then for reasons just discussed, the Marxist explanation of the state is incomplete in its failure to specify the origins of ambition. If it is universal, but its expression is suppressed in certain kinds of societies, then obviously there is more to socio-political evolution than self-aggrandizement. We cannot fully explain the emergence of social institutions by a psychological feature that is itself conditioned by social institutions. As briefly discussed earlier in this chapter, there is indeed a tendency towards social leveling in simpler societies. Richard Lee has given us a delightful illustration of this from his work among the Bushman foragers of the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa. One year at Christmas, he bought an ox for a Bushman group. Rather than the praise he expected, Lee encountered criticism of his gift. This criticism, that the animal was thin and old, continued right up to the Christmas feast. At the time the ox was eaten with obvious enjoyment, Bushman, questioned on the matter, explained that they simply could not allow arrogance or let anyone think of himself as a chief or a big man. Superior outside hunters are treated similarly. Thus, the egalitarian ethic is reinforced. Where egalitarian cooperation is essential for survival, hoarding and self-aggrandizement are simply not tolerated. It is only in societies already following a trajectory of developing complexity that such tendencies are allowed expression. Why is this? Can it be that the fulfillment of individual ambitions in certain contexts has society-wide benefits, just as its suppression does in other settings, such as the Bushmen? Well, the answer to that fascinating question is far beyond the scope of this work. It does lead to a consideration of integration theory and must indeed be a central assumption of that theory. In integration theory, the differential benefits accruing to those who fulfill society-wide administrative roles are seen as compensation for performing the socially most important functions. The costs of stratification are a necessary evil which must be borne to realize its integrative benefits. In basing the development of complexity on real observable physical needs, defense, public works, resource sharing, etc., integration theory avoids the psychological reductionism that cripples Marxism. Human tendencies toward self-aggrandizement are seen as controlled in a socio-political matrix, so that they are expressed in situations of benefit and suppressed elsewhere. Expression of ambition is a dependent social variable rather than an independent psychological constant. This view, however appealing to many social theorists, as well as the elites thereby defended, is clearly oversimplified. It seems obvious, for example, that the costs and benefits of stratification are not always as balanced as integration theory might imply. Compensation of elites does not always match their contribution to society, and throughout their history, elites have probably been overcompensated relative to performance more often than the reverse. Coercion and authoritarian exploitative regimes are undeniable facts of history. Haas has made an important point overlooked by many integration theorists. A governing body that provides goods or services has coercive authority therein. The threat of withholding benefits can be a powerful inducement to compliance. As Haas has stated, coercive force is an inevitable covariable of an essential benefit. Granting the logic of this, it seems clear that there must be more to socio-political evolution than the Panglossian view that integration theory implies. Legitimacy is a matter that touches both views. As long as elites must rely on force to ensure compliance, much of their profit will be consumed by the costs of coercion. Even conflict theorists must, therefore, acknowledge the role of legitimizing activities in maintaining a governing elite. Indeed, one Marxist anthropologist has argued that, quote, classes could only have grown up in societies legitimately, or at least the process of transformation must have been slow, and the legitimacy of their transformation must long have weighed more heavily in the balance than such factors as violence, usurpations, betrayals, etc. I'll just remark here, there's talk of coercion in government services. Well, where I live, the federal government has announced that it intends to nationalize business. So if you don't get the jab, you don't have a job. And, you can't sue, even if bad things happen to you after the jab, because the government has decided to indemnify all Canadian business. Thus, we see the power of coercion, even in what is ostensibly still a liberal democratic regime. But back to Joseph Tainter. All official ideologies incorporate the thesis that the structure of the government serves the common good. Conflict theorists may smirk at this opiate of the masses, but in fact it binds the rulers as well as the ruled. Some delivery on this promise is essential. Legitimizing activities must include real outputs, as well as manipulation of symbols, and where they don't, costly and unprofitable investments must be made in coercive sanctions. Clayson makes the point that in order to secure loyalty, rulers need return as gifts to the populace only a fraction of what has been secured in taxes or tribute. Conflict and integration theories seem then to be individually inadequate to account for both the origin and the persistence of the state. This fact has led some to call for their combination. Governmental institutions both result from unequal access to resources and also create benefits for their citizenry. They are definitely beneficial integrative advantages in the concentration of power and authority. Once established, however, the political realm becomes an increasingly important determinant of change in economy, society, and culture. Integration theory is better able to account for distribution of the necessities of life, and conflict theory for surpluses. The reader may have discerned that, while accepting the suggestion that a synthesis is necessary to understand both the emergence and continuation of states, the view followed here leads toward the integration side. The psychological reductionism of conflict theory is an insurmountable flaw. Self-aggrandizement cannot account for the development of states, but it certainly does help in understanding their subsequent history. There is, however, a very important point that conflict and integration theory have in common. In both views, states are problem-solving organizations. Both theories see the state as rising out of changed circumstances and as being a response to those circumstances. In conflict theory, a state develops to solve problems of class conflict that emerge from differential economic success. In integration theory, governing institutions arise to secure the well-being of the total populace. While the purposes of the state are seen as different, on this level, the state of conflict theorists and the state of integrationists are the same kind of institution. As will be seen in subsequent chapters, the nature of complex societies as problem-solving organizations has much to do with understanding why they collapse. In this regard, while conflict theorists will be disappointed by these views on the nature and emergence of complexity, they will still find utility in the explanation of collapse. And I will discuss tomorrow the next chapter heading, Summary and Implications. You see, Tainter is giving the hint here that complex societies are useful so long as they can solve problems. When they can no longer solve problems, their utility diminishes significantly, and sometimes rapidly, which could well be where we are today. I want to talk about an essay from James Howard Kunstler that appeared last week in the American Conservative, Past Success, Present Delusions, The Future of the New Urbanism, The new urbanists never quite grok the transitional nature of their movement, but as we adapt to localism, we'll be grateful for what they rediscovered. Kunstler begins, those of us deeply interested in the physical arrangement of human life on the American landscape may wonder where the new urbanism movement is going with the onset of a long emergency. That is a period of severe turbulence in the economic and political terms of existence. We're well into that now, and it manifests as falling standards of living, a vanishing middle class, institutional dysfunction, political distress, and perilous uncertainty about livelihoods, liberties, laws, and even civil order. Well, what Kunstler is describing here is a complex society which can no longer solve problems. He continues, until this last week, the COVID-19 rent moratorium was still in effect after more than a year, negating any logic for investment in commercial real estate. The losses incurred by property owners and developers may never be recouped, and a dangerous precedent has been set for what amounts to future unconstitutional breaches of basic contract law and property rights. It also means many property owners will lose incentive for maintaining buildings. Nothing besides kinetic war could be unhealthier for our towns and cities. The business model of the giant urban metroplex is broken. Office skyscrapers can't cover their costs of operation at 25% occupancy. Condo associations can't cover their taxes and repairs, even if a small percentage of their members default. The city's tax base shrinks, services degenerate, public space is lost to crime, and people bug out. This is already underway in former hotspots such as New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, and Portland, Oregon. In Detroit, St. Louis, and Baltimore, the process of disintegration started decades ago when industry bailed, and the process is just about complete now. The COVID-19 rush to suburbia surely seemed like a good idea at the time to people who could all of a sudden work from home. But of all the modes for occupying the terrain, suburbia really has the poorest prospects as the sun sets on the happy motoring paradigm and the oil bonanza that made it possible. In fact, it was the fiasco of suburbia that prompted the new urbanism movement to get going in the early 1990s. The coming online of the last giant oil discoveries in the 1980s, Alaska, the North Sea, the Gulf of Mexico, revived the suburban expansion that had faltered with the oil crises of the 1970s. In the meantime, a generation of architects and builders had matured and charged in to transform all that toxic schlock. It was clear by the late 20th century that the common suburban template had produced a universal dystopia of places not worth caring about, and that it was perfectly obvious that it was possible to do better by employing the lost principles of traditional town making that had been cast aside by the traffic engineers, production home builders, zoning officials, and other super specialists who made the rules. You see, he's talking about complexity here, a surfeit of complexity, which leads to societies which can no longer solve their problems. Kunstler continues, the new urbanists succeeded spectacularly and rapidly by building dozens of new neighborhoods and whole new towns that were clearly more appealing than usual soulless subdivisions with their ghastly strip mall accessories. The real estate prices in places like Seaside, Florida, and the Kentlands Project in Maryland reflected the verdict of the market. The new urbanists also turned their energies on rehabilitating rundown existing town centers and learned to expertly fix the nuts and bolts of the legal codes that had ruinously mandated suburban outcome anywhere someone tried to build anything. Considering all the problems America faced in the new millennium, the new urbanists went furthest in finding practical solutions to a range of ills connected to how we live, from extreme car dependency, the runaway costs of infrastructure, the eroding family structure, and the sheer horrifying and demoralizing ugliness that had accreted over the land like a chronic disease and just plain made people feel bad about themselves and their country. Yet the new urbanists never quite grokked the transitional nature of their movement. It was keyed to the continual expansion of the techno-industrial economy and the belief that the unbuilt property and all the seemingly endless rings of exurbia would continue to be developed. Conditions are now changing drastically and rapidly. Suddenly we face contraction, not ever more expansion, including very probably a population decline. The orgy of near zero capital lending is reaching a climax in history's greatest debt implosion, And the upshot of that will be very scarce capital to finance any sort of project. That includes the ability to finance government, and one implication of that will be the end of rigorous code enforcement. For the moment, and judging by the chatter among various online new urbanist discussion groups, some mission themes rampant in this movement right now are pretty delusional. The main one is an obsession with climate change that plays out in furious efforts to mitigate it with technology, especially green this and that, mostly based on the fantasy that alternative energy will replace fossil fuels. That just ain't going to happen. There is no reality-based business model that actually works for that. Anyway, globalism is now imploding. Geopolitical animosities are rising. Supply lines for all kinds of raw materials and manufactured products are faltering, and all of that is going to get worse. Now, there is an answer for climate change problems, but it lacks the dazzle and glitz of Greentopia, namely adaptation, not mitigation. If your corner of the country isn't working out, you might consider moving. A lot of the problems attributed to climate change are not quite what they seem to be. It wasn't until the mid-20th century that every scrap of sand dune along the Atlantic coast got packed with beach houses, or that the Northern California forest got filled with single-family houses. Now the ocean is periodically encroaching and the woods are catching fire. There is a huge dollar amount of property at risk, which prompts ever more complex attempts to protect all that high-value real estate. Most of all, it's become an insurance problem. We've simply built ourselves into a situation of hyper-fragility. Some climate issues are not even so much about change. The southern half of North America has been hot since before Europeans arrived. It was mostly an agricultural backwater or empty desert before the Second World War. The region entered a period of hypertrophic growth around 1960 with the introduction of air conditioning. We've taken a reliable electric grid for granted since then, but that may well turn out to have been a transient luxury. The grid is decrepit and the cost of producing electricity is going up fast. Daily life without air conditioning on demand will change daily life pretty drastically in Arizona and Alabama, though the climate will be about the same as when Hernan de Soto tromped through there. We will be compelled to find other ways to deal with it, to adapt or move. Other delusional missions among the new urbanists these days is a condition that's observable throughout American culture. The belief that if you can measure enough things, you can control them. Hand-wringing over climate statistics is not going to fix any of that. Consider, by the way, that it wasn't even until the late 19th century that we began to measure weather rigorously and keep meticulous records. So, to some degree, we are just responding hyperbolically to our very recent and limited record keeping. Hence, we live now in an endless gale of statistical noise, prompting endless community meetings that lead nowhere. This form of hubris I like to call organizational narcissism, the step-sister of a techno-narcissism, which posits that every problem we face has a technological problem. New urbanists have played a very important role in the period of history that we are suddenly leaving behind. They retrieved a lot of the very important, nearly lost principle about how to build places that are soulfully pleasing, functionally adaptable over time, and economically suited to the coming more localized disposition of things. These should be the concerns of all people in the design and building vocations going forward. You know, I read this and I think about my own country, particularly, let's say, Vancouver and Toronto. So we need more immigrants than we've ever had. Well, certainly since more than 100 years ago. And these new immigrants, we're not going to toss them onto the prairies and say, root hog or die. No, it's going to be an urban environment for these people. Well, there's no land left in Vancouver. There's none. And how far can Toronto continue to spread? I mean, I was shocked decades ago when I discovered that people would commute to Toronto, by the GO train. Every day they go to Toronto and then back to Barrie, Ontario. Yeah, that's how bad the sprawl was decades ago. So what are we going to do? Are we just going to just stack people higher and higher and higher in the sky? Very energy intensive that is. for all our talk about saving energy. And, we're just going to continue to pay people not to work for how long? Forever? We're just going to give more and more of the country to the Indians, more and more and more and more Gibbs. Because apparently, as I mentioned yesterday, governments don't need tax revenues anymore. I can see things in my country going south, going all J.G. Ballard in a real hurry. Let's take a look at the chat. What's the latest? It's worse now. Go train goes to Kitchener, says Popcastle 88. Edward Richardson does not like Jim Kunstler. The author is blinkered and verbose. His complex societies create problems. USSR lasted 7 years. It created economic problems. COVID states are great examples. As for oil, plenty of it, more than ever. Well, we're not running out of oil anytime soon, but it's going to become more and more expensive. We get the whipsaw effect, which Kunstler himself has written about. And we have seen this. And I've observed it myself because I wrote about the oil industry for several years. If oil costs more than $75 a barrel US, the economy implodes. If oil trades for less than $75 a barrel US, the oil industry implodes. Well, I mean, we're going to be using oil for a long time. You know, we decided very stupidly, no, we don't want to use coal anymore. Oh, because it's so polluting. Oh, well, you know, we have scrubbers and all that sort of thing now. I mean, I was just, when I was staying at my father's condo last year, and my brother told me what the electrical bills were. I could hardly believe it because I pretty much just stayed in the kitchen. I was sitting, you know, there in the kitchen on a table in front of this same computer setup. And then I would go to sleep at night. Oh, you know, I'd wash my face and use the toilet and have a shower. But the vast part of the condo, it was quite a large condo, I didn't use ever. I just turned the heat on enough so that, you know, things didn't get moldy or whatever. And then the bill, just absolutely shocking. Because in British Columbia, we've decided that, no, we're not going to use things like coal, you know. It's how are people supposed to pay for this? That part hasn't been worked out. Gamian says American towns are the same as American produce, a plastic, a tasteless, lifeless, and not made for consumption. Respectable commenting name says KMG, we have to save the climate by not using coal and instead outsourcing to countries that use coal without expensive scrubbing apparatus and importing their poor back here. Yes, of course. Yes, of course. Let's, we're worried about the carbon footprint. Let's take people from places with almost no carbon footprint and bring them here so they can have a large carbon footprint. Yeah, that makes, and we're still importing people into deserts, actual deserts, like Southern California and Arizona and New Mexico. They don't have any water. But no, they're never going to run out of the water. The water table of the Colorado River has been falling for decades, but that's never going to become a crisis because why would it? Okay. Oh, that's a good one, Palpcasso 88. The good joke. I'm not going to repeat it, though. Tiberea says forest arson is what they call wildfires, paid criminals. Everyone's back to horses, sail, and windmills. Kunstler's site is called, it's called Kunstler.com. Let me check here. It's Kunstler.com. Yes. That's a lovely name. It's German. It means artist. Visionary Companion says, I wonder if anyone remembers the Bill Owens book of photos, Suburbia. No, I've never seen it. I try to think of my own memories of suburbia. I mean, I actually lived in the 60s, in the mid-60s, in Coquitlam and Port Coquitlam, which is right on the Fraser River. Yeah, that was definitely suburbia. I lived in several places in North Vancouver. I don't consider North Vancouver to be suburbia because, you know, it's functioning. That is to say, you don't have to drive for 10 minutes. Get in your car and drive for 10 minutes to get a pack of cigarettes or a liter of milk, you know. You can actually, you know, there are the parks. It was planned organically, and it is not sterile and cut off from everything else. So as I say, I don't see North Vancouver as being suburbia. Does Dutton occasionally sport an ascot? That'd be, what's his name, Ed Dutton? Kevin should wear a bow tie once a week, says Ann Run. Yeah, well then, you know, maybe I could get some rimless glasses and look like George W. Will. I think George W. Will put me off bow ties forever. I think a green screen with 50s, 60s newsroom footage, people chain smoking and typing would suit this show. I wondered about that, how to get this green screen thing going. I think Kevin should open up every show with the fifth dimensions up, and away, written by Jimmy Webb. Yes, I love Jimmy Webb. Demi Moore wrote a book. I reviewed Demi Moore's book. This is a question from Seraphim Goose. Clueless, and I don't think honest. She talks about her first marriage, and she got married for the first time when she was 16 or 17. And she says that she doesn't remember the church that it took place in. And I'm thinking, I don't believe you. Okay, I come to the KMG show for lightness and positivity, said Halper. I was just thinking earlier in the show that I should just start doing at least one show a week where I'm not going to mention C19. I'm not going to mention it, you know. I love Theater Thursday, but a minor criticism is he only does movies he likes. It would be fun for him to eviscerate a bad Megapause movie once in a while, says Paul Casso 88. I'll think about it. It's just you get so much of that from so many sources now. And, you know, one likes to light a single candle rather than curse the darkness. Dionysus says, KMG, you stated the book White Shift was optimistic. What do you mean by that? Well, the author, Kaufman, who's a very clever fellow, by the way, he believes that this sort of, you know, everyone becoming mystery meat, it's all going to work out well, or it should work out well, or the prospects for it working out well are good. Ogan's Iron says, wife almost never talks about politics, yet said today she's scared this COVID thing will lead to war. George Will, I'm smarter than you. Yeah, Don Willis. I read his book on baseball, and I was absolutely infuriated. You know, he belongs to that cosmic slop theory of baseball. Who else do we have there? A. Bartlett Giamatti is another one. Do you know that the foul lines continue unto infinity? Wow. Mind blown. W.P. Kinsella, another contributor to the cosmic slop theory of baseball appreciation. And when George Will decides to pick on Ted Williams, oh, he was a selfish player. Oh, how was he selfish, George Will? Because he wouldn't swing at bad pitches. Okay, so if he's not going to swing at bad pitches, he's going to get a walk. Oh, but maybe he could have gone out of the strike zone, you know, to get a double or a home run or something. You look at Ted Williams' on base percentage. It is absolutely amazing. And he kept that up for what? Almost 20 years, despite the fact that he lost 5 years because of World War II and the Korean War. A 482 on base percentage. That is virtually 1 out of every 2 plate appearances Ted Williams got on base. Oh, he also hit for power as well. 344 batting average, 521 home runs. Yeah, you definitely want to mess with that approach. Right, George Will? Oh, Ted Williams never won a World Series. Well, Barry Bonds never won a World Series too. And I saw some of the most stupendous playoff performances by him. There's 9 players on the field, and one hitter he's one man out of 9. You cannot expect one man to carry a whole team. So let's, we're back to it. It's Tuesday night, and I don't go out very much for various reasons. But every Tuesday for several months, I've been going to a restaurant/bar, which is in what they call Cook Street Village, which is near the park and not far from the ocean, in the northern part of Victoria. And it's 2 miles away from where I'm sitting now, but it might as well be a world away. There are no chuds there. Everyone seems normal and nice and friendly, and there are not lurching lunatics stumbling around the streets screaming obscenities the whole time and threats. So, I like to go there, and the food is good. But tonight is the last time that I'm going to be going there. The reason being vaccine passport, which comes into effect 6 days from now. And cruelly, it seems to me, the government of British Columbia decided that outdoor patios, count as inside. Yeah. Despite the fact that they're, not shielded from the outside, the air is coming from every direction. No, they've done this on purpose to enforce, as a method of coercion. Yeah, this is the word of the day, coercion. So anyone who wants access to the following places or to the following activities after September 13th will need to show proof of vaccination. That's 1 dose. By October the 24th, 2 doses. And then doubtless 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 doses to come. Indoor ticketed sporting events, indoor concerts, indoor theater, dance, symphony events, restaurants, indoor and patio dining, nightclubs, casinos, movie theaters, fitness centers, gyms, businesses offering indoor high-intensity group exercise activities, organized indoor events, e.g. weddings, parties, conferences, meetings, workshops, discretionary organized indoor group recreational classes and activities, student housing on college and university campuses. Cards are available to download or print through the Provincial Health Gateway website as of Tuesday, though the site has been crashing due to high traffic volume. Perhaps it could be crashing due to something else. Yes, the ghost in the machine, Kessler called it. Oh, and we have an election going on in Canada, and the COVID has become kind of essential to that. I see pressreader.com does not like my browser. Well, it was working this morning. It was. Let's see if I can bring this story up. In any event, Justin Trudeau, he's just so butch. He is just so angry. He's going to not let mobs, anti-vaxxer mobs, hold Canada back from his dictatorial vision of total control. No, he's not going to let that happen. And, so the latest from Aaron O'Toole. He promises health minister would be vaccinated despite no rules for candidates. Can you imagine? That's from Stephanie Taylor at CTV News. Can you imagine anything more arbitrary and pointless than that? Well, of course, COVID-19 and lockdowns have been an excuse for people to become slovenly, or even more slovenly than they were previously. And now it's time to take that into the office. This is from CBC News. After 18 months of working from home, some workers returning to the office this fall are reevaluating what it means to dress for work. That sounds ominous. Amy Robichaud, an executive director for the nonprofit foundation Dress for Success Vancouver, says the pandemic has sped up the casualization of many workers' wardrobes. We put an emphasis on not just physical comfort, but psychological comfort, Robichaud said. Since the start of the pandemic, Many working at home have switched to soft, comfortable clothes like leisure wear, sweatpants, leggings, sweaters, and other casual items. Get ready for the camel toe in the office. I guess that's what we're being told. In some ways, RoboShow says that's helped with work productivity. That has not been my experience. My experience has been that a more formal approach, sitting before your computer, yields more results. Because if you are, if you're dressed as if you're not working, and you've got your snacks and you've got your drinks and you got a bunch of tabs open with maybe some YouTube videos, it doesn't feel like work and you're not likely to be very productive. Again, but that's just merely my experience. Studies have shown that when we dress comfortably and feel comfortably in our own skin, our cognition is increased. Okay, so these people dress like slobs and they're going to be more comfortable in their own skin, are they? I wonder. But who's hurt the most? Who's hurt the most? Why women are hurt the most, of course, by this needless formality. A RoboShow, whose foundation helps women enter the workforce by offering professional attire and career services, says expectations are often gendered. Men and women are held to a different standard, she said, noting that women are expected to keep up with fashion trends and use makeup, for example. Really? They are? The boss is going to complain that the woman sitting in a cubicle or in a shared office, well, you're not wearing enough powder. Where's your eyeliner? Are we really supposed to believe that that is going on in the year of our Lord at 2021? And, oh yes, the experts. What do the experts have to tell us? I saw a YouTube video of the head of leading testing companies, medical testing companies in the United States, and it was quite worrisome. Essentially, this fellow was arguing that the jabs are leading to an increase of many other diseases for the reason that it is screwing around with our body and our immune system. CDC Director Rochelle Walensky, and you remember, she almost burst into tears at her first news conference because she was so scared. Quote, vaccinated people do not carry the virus, don't get sick, and that's not just in the clinical trials, but it's also in real world data, unquote. They just lie. They will lie and lie and lie and lie. And we know that vaccinated people do carry the virus, they do get sick, and they are dying increasingly. But no, she's just going to say what she must know to be untrue. This is from Jennifer Smith at the Daily Mail. Rand Paul said Fauci lied to Congress by insisting U.S. never funded gain-of-function research at Wuhan lab after newly unearthed grant proposal, reveals how scientists studied back coronavirus with American money. In 2014, Echo Health Alliance, a U.S. health organization, was given a $3.3 million grant by the National Institute of Health to study back coronaviruses. Its idea was try to preempt the next SARS or MERS virus. Echo Health ended up giving $600,000 to the Wuhan Institute of Virology because that's the sort of thing that one does in that business. I don't mean to sound naive, but how is it that everyone involved in gain-of-function research, not just the people working in the laboratory, but the people who approve it, the people that have funded it, the people who continue to say that it is necessary, that these people have not been socially and professionally humiliated, driven from society. In a worse mood, I could come up with more stringent punishments, but I'll stick with that for the time being. This is from Kane at Citizen Free Press. What the screenshot demonstrates is that Pfizer's new twice-daily pill for COVID utilizes an unknown protease inhibitor, while including a snip from this study showing that the eye drug also acts as a protease inhibitor. Just another data point in favor of the eye drug. Yeah. The problem with the eye drug is that it is remarkably cheap. And these Pfizer double doses, they're not going to be cheap. They're not going to be cheap at all, but it's good for the GDP. You got to say that, right? This is from David Avi at Bloomberg. Israel, once a front runner in the global race to move on from COVID-19, is now one of the world's biggest pandemic hotspots. The country that was once predicted to be the first to vaccinate its entire population had the highest per capita caseload of anywhere in the week through September the 4th. According to figures compiled by Johns Hopkins University, its world-beating inoculation rate, meanwhile, has tumbled down the league table. The nation of 9 million became the test case for reopening society and the economy in April, when much of Europe and the US were still in some form of lockdown. Yet Israel now shows how the calculus is changing in places where progress was fastest. It's no longer just about whether people get coronavirus, but also how badly they get it, and ensuring that vaccines are still working as the highly infectious Delta variant threatens to undermine immunity. Oh, wait. But there's something worse than that even. New COVID variant now found in 49 U.S. states. This is from Brandon Sapienza at the New York Daily News. And once again, not for the first time, I just get the very strong feeling that they are enjoying this. They're enjoying it. There's a good essay by Hank Oslo at theamericansun.com, and I have read from his work previously. So your government is building camps. This happens. It's actually pretty common historically, as the logic of detaining prisoners of war, itself a fairly liberal idea, much more enlightened than the traditional massacre or enslavement, and more scalable in ransom, was extended to a domestic or pseudo-domestic population of enemies. Everyone likes to focus on the most notorious set of examples, despite being fairly short-lived, even to the exclusion of realizing that there are other examples. The contemporaneous Soviet gulags are well known in the general population. The U.S. interned its Japanese, Italian, and German populations. You don't hear so much about the white guys for the duration. The term itself was invented by the British to describe the brutal anti-Boer counterinsurgency practice in South Africa. Enumerating the examples from the Eastern Bloc, from Romania to China, gets into semantics of a prison versus a camp. Really, no one has described the phenomenon better on a metaphysical level than Solzhenitsyn. The latter chapters are a catalog of specific brutalities, but the first couple hundred pages or so are universal in their application. So we didn't love freedom enough, Solzhenitsyn wrote, and even more, we had no awareness of the real situation. And Oslo comments, of course, Solzhenitsyn spends the rest of the chapter explaining why it is simply unreasonable, as a matter of prudence and human psychology, to expect people to love freedom in the abstract so much that one bashes the secret police over the head with a lamp and suffers the concrete consequences. Transformation of a temporary internment into a one-way trip is highly contextual. In the gulags themselves, most were at least putatively imprisoned on criminal rather than explicitly political grounds, a thin distinction at the time, but one with significant consequences, for perhaps 5 years at a toss. The thing to draw from this is that it is not an a priori, it's not clear how a mass internment is going to go, and much depends on the underlying resources, calories, logistics, and competency available to the regime, assuming that they don't decide on a policy of destruction for political purposes at some point. Until the policy change marked at the Wannsee conference, it was plausible that as a random Polish civilian, you might be safer inside Auschwitz than in the path of the Leibstandarte SS. Fortunately, the Australian government loves its citizens very much, despite the fact that they are totally superfluous to their long-term mission of selling every mineral asset on the continent at a fair price. Their recent political project to destroy the ability of their citizens to coordinate political activity should not be taken as a sign that they would be so ruthless as to imprison dissenters on public health grounds or use medicalized euthanasia on a captive population, despite a year and a half of evidence doing so was fatal. Their competency and respect for epidemiology is undoubtable, and their results speak for themselves. The most comforting knowledge is that their population has no choice but to trust them. And here's some news from Vietnam. This is from Adrian Robinson's Substack. Rubbing salt in the wounds. In Vietnam's wartime-style lockdown, where everything goes, life really is different. For example, the people lawfully selling food in the equivalent of the corner shop in the UK are terrified the police will close them down, despite it not being against the law, I think, to sell food. Such shopkeepers hide behind their doors, and then when the customer walks by, they are ushered into the store. The door closed and blinds down, so it looks like no one is there. This week, all the Vietnamese kids went back to school online. Vietnam's connectivity is patchy at the best of times, and the undersea cables that provide Vietnam with the internet to USA, China, Singapore, and the rest of the world breaks down 2 or 3 times a year. Now, because of the savage lockdown, demand for internet schooling and business is at its maximum. Today, the cable under the sea broke again. So, to add to not knowing if you'll get the food you need every day, the children's schooling and adults' online business conferencing is severely impaired. This affects people's ability to make a living at a time when scant few can even do that, and these kids have had 2 years of online schooling with about 6 months in school in between. The cable breaking, LOL, it actually feels just right for the mood of life in this lockdown, and that is Vietnam today. Let's have a quick look at dailyskeptic.org, formerly known as Lockdown Skeptics. Highest taxes since World War II as Boris Johnson abandons manifesto pledges. Has there ever been a promise that Boris Johnson has made that he is not abandoned? And they're talking about an October lockdown in England because, you know, all the other lockdowns haven't worked, but obviously the thing to do now is, well, another lockdown. I mean, doy. Let's see. Someone on British Talk Radio. I'm sick of being told I have to protect the NHS. Kevin says we must not have another lockdown to save the NHS. Free speech champion Toby Young agrees. It has become our national religion. A lot of people are sick to the back teeth of this. Travel system could be scrapped next month, only to be replaced by new system based on COVID vaccination. Confusion over reported plans for October firebreak lockdown. Would they come up with a sexy name? What they previously called a circuit breaker? Now it's a firebreak. Number of children referred for foster care increased by more than 1/3 over the past year of lockdowns. And I hope all of the people in favor of this madness consider that. Children are abandoning their, parents are abandoning their children because of this. I hope you're happy. And let's see if there is anything on Alex Berenson's Substack. Moving target. The end of COVID is nigh. Thanks to the miracle of vaccines. Just ask Dr. Anthony Fauci. Then ask him again and again. And hedge fund managers sometimes joke the stock market has predicted 9 of the last 5 recessions. And then there's Anthony Fauci. Here he is on November the 12th, 2020, just after Pfizer released the first data showing its vaccines were 90% effective. Don't ask it what. Fauci says end to pandemic in sight thanks to vaccines. Again, that is November the 12th, 2020. Could you be more specific, Doc? He sure could. A month later, from NPR, Fauci predicts U.S. could see signs of herd immunity by late March or early April. If America's doctor says it, you can believe it. Maybe. 3 months later, in March 2021, about when we were supposed to be hitting herd immunity, we were a mere 4 to 6 months away. Woke math is the best. Fauci gives a sunnier outlook for end of pandemic. U.S. will see big difference by summer or early fall. And this is from Forbes, March 11th of this year. And here we are in late summer, heading for early fall. Pandemic's got to be over, right? Let's party. Hot vaxxed fall. Yeah, about that. From the Seattle Times. Dr. Fauci said August 25th says no end to COVID pandemic before spring 22 at the earliest. It's almost as if the vaccines aren't helping at all. Almost. But that can't be right. And I'm going to end briefly by noting William Briggs' excellent website, Statistician of the Stars. He is, that is W.M. Briggs with 2Gs.com. In his latest column today, Zero COVID, Holocaust, Delta waning, guilt as a weapon, and more. Biden to unveil new plan to stop Delta variant on Thursday. This is from @Disclosed TV. Take that, Delta variant. We're not kidding around here. We weren't kidding around before, but now we're really not kidding around. Briggs says, we start with the numbers this week to make a crucially important point. The dreaded Delta variant is waning, as we predicted, but before, unfortunately, hysterics begin to implement new solutions, the same old tired ones, masks, etc., meaning they will take credit where credit is not due. All numbers today are from this CDC official source. We can't do the normal numbers because Monday was a holiday and the ruling class minions did not update the usual data. First, cases, a word you must always use with the scare quotes. Cases is a mixture of disease prevalence, testing level, and testing sensitivity, and has zero indication of illness severity. The number by itself tells you nothing of importance. It is used as a propaganda tool only, and is used by weak minds like horror films to frighten oneself. Yet we must use it here because it is the expert's tool. It is clear the peak has been passed. Whether this is because the disease is becoming less prevalent, testing has decreased, or testing has become less sensitive, we cannot tell from this one number. But we might try and use this measure of social activity to guess when bottom comes. You see, the other peaks were followed by less rapid falls than rises. Same likely true here. Perhaps sometime in mid to late October then, assuming behavior remains as it has before. The bottom will come just as the next rise will begin. This point cannot be overemphasized. The corona doom has not been cured. The vaccine will not eliminate corona doom. It is endemic. That's a word experts forget. It means corona doom will be with us forever. Therefore, solutions to bring us to zero COVID will fail forever. And the countries that implement them, like Australia and others, if they cannot release their grip on fear and expert hubris, will die. That's it for today. What is coming up later in the week? On Theater Thursday, I'm going to be discussing a comedy, a futuristic comedy, a satire of the future as it happened in France in 1967 by Jacques Tati called Playtime. On the book club, one of the greatest books ever written, September 10th, I'll be talking about Bernard Diaz's The True History of the Conquest of New Spain. And on the Music Monday, on September 13th, I'm going to be talking about the child ballads in song. I can't stand that little imp smug face anymore, says Chogoken 666. Kevin George Sanders was the saint, not that hack Roger Moore. Okay, if you say so, Anne Run. I quite enjoyed watching Roger Moore as the saint, both in black and white and in color. He was just the right age for it. He was simply too old for James Bond. Also, the 70s clothes, safari jackets, yikes. Diabolical, as they say in England. True Greenbird says, my sister and her boyfriend got it. They recovered quickly, not even an issue. No hospitalization, both in their late 40s. Enron says, a friend of mine died from it, but he was negligent and also didn't get good care at the hospital he went to. Contiki Roulette says, I know 6 people who tested positive, not a single symptom, 0 sickness, just a positive test. Okay. How long have we tolerated the horror stories at airports, says Metal Mike. I remember after 9/11, the first time I went on a plane to the United States, and I thought, you know, flying used to be considered fun, okay? You see pictures from the 1960s, particularly, you know, with the Boeing 747, the double-decker, and it's just there's a big party going on. There's a big party going on. And then all these planes started to be hijacked, and they started putting more and more restrictions. People used to go to the airport for the sole purpose of watching planes take off and land. Yeah, that was a thing that people did. You can't do that anymore. But then after 9/11, oh, you're going to treat me even more as a criminal than you have done already. You're not seriously telling me I can't bring, liquid in bottles, little bits of mouthwash or little bottles of mouthwash. Really? I can't do that. That I have to take off my shoes because of some 2-part bomb that has never existed. Yeah, well, they enjoy it. They enjoy it. But they're not going to win because they can't win. Because their winning will destroy everything. Depend on it. So that's it for today. Thank you all for tuning in. Of course, I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which I could really, really use right now, no question about it, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations may be made to the live stream directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.